So, hello and welcome to Meliorist Writes. Today, I'm very, very excited because we have a beautiful guest. Um, Lovely Laurie Eaves is with us. Welcome, Laurie.
Hi, Ezra.
Laurie is a fantastic poet, a performance poet. We're going to be talking a bit about your collection Biceps today, which I'm really very, very keen to hear a little bit about. But I'm also interested to hear about your entire process of writing, of how performing comes into that, how editing comes along with that. So I think the really first thing I'm just going to start off with is when you are writing, what comes first? Do you have the idea for the poem? This is the concept. I'm going to write this.
Yeah.
Or is it just the word, the phrase that's sneaking in there?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's usually the former. So a lot of my poetry tends to be about certain moments or certain times where, like, I think people can really overthink what a poem is. And for a lot of my poems, it's like I saw this thing and I thought it was weird or interesting, and I thought, oh, there's a poem somewhere in that. I'm a big believer in diary keeping. Actually, that's like the biggest
Yeah.
thing that I do writing wise. Obviously, nobody sees it, but like every day, I've been keeping a diary for a long time, and I'm literally just like writing down. I saw this weird thing today. Somebody like had a child in a shopping trolley. That was a bit strange. Like just the things I've seen or noticed or thought. And sometimes that's phrases. Sometimes that's not necessarily a um, something visual. Sometimes it is like a phrase that's popped in my head or a phrase that's somebody else has said that I've gone, that's really weird. I like the phrasing there. What could I maybe do with that? But I literally have just like noted it down either in a diary or on my phone. And I take both of those things like everywhere with me. So I'm always like doing this collecting process to start with. And then when it comes to the kind of actual kind of sitting down to write, as it were, um, I'm never really without something that I want to write about because I'm like, okay, I'll flip back through that book. I'll flip back through my phone, see, okay, I wrote like the other day, I watched some people like on the tube trying to deal with a bee that got in the carriage. Okay, that's what I'm going to start with. And then I'll just start to write. And the approach that I have to that kind of varies. It might be, and quite often is, to start with, just I'm going to free write for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, however long. I'm going to just be like, okay, there's this bee on the tube carriage, right? And I start writing the story of it all out. A lot of Biceps started in this way,
Yeah.
actually, of just, I've got an idea of a moment. I'm going to start writing about it. And then I end up with way too much text.
Yes.
And then it's, okay, what's next?
So, how often are you? I suppose I get a lot when I'm talking to kind of student writers of, oh, I wait for the inspiration, or no, do I need to work at this? So, when you sit down to write, so you've got your little book of ideas,
Yeah.
are there days where you're like, actually, I really want to go and work on that bee poem, or are there
Mhm.
days, or the both, indeed, of, okay, I got to open the notebook, I got to see what.
Yeah, I mean, you see what's in there. Yeah, I mean, it's a mix. Like, um, and often what will happen is I'll sit down and be like, okay, I've got a bit of time, and that's not necessarily sitting down at my desk. Like, quite
Mm.
often, I love. COVID was terrible for me. I love writing in cafes. I love writing on the tube. I love writing when I'm on the move, and like, I. Like COVID was like, oh my God, this is terrible for me actually, because I sitting at home in silence actually really, it can work for me, but I've really got to, it feels really worky. I've got to
Mm.
really push myself to do that. I find it much easier to do it when I'm moving, actually. So when I am like traveling on trains and stuff like that. Um, but quite often sit down with, okay, I want to write about this thing. The B one, I don't know why I picked that out because I haven't actually finished
Oh
finished
no.
writing that or got a draft that's even half decent on that one. But say it's that, I'll sit down and be like, right, okay, I want to do this B thing. And then what will actually happen is I'll start on it and maybe it will start to come. Maybe I'll find a way into it, like a phrase or a idea that starts to unlock it a little bit for me.
Yeah.
Quite often what happens though is I start to realize that's not working at all. Okay, what other ideas did I have that I
Yeah.
haven't touched on? Can I use any of those instead? And I'll try and flip back and just find something. One of the poems in the book, actually, it's a short poem. It's called Rubos,
Mhm.
um, that is in Biceps. I was doing a workshop and was I can't remember what the prompt was or anything like that. Sat down, worked on it for about an hour. Was like, this is not working at all. I cannot get this to work. And then rattled out in the last like 10 seconds of the workshop, Rubos, almost exactly as it is in the book. And was just like, there
That's
you go, done. Like that was not what I was expecting to write, but I could not
yeah.
do the prompt, so had to go off in a completely other direction.
I often find that I will write maybe like an hour's worth of nonsense wasted material, and then the last 10 minutes something kind of forms.
Well,
I,
I
I think
think it's
a lot
interesting
of
to put
writing.
it as wasted material because
Yeah.
I don't think it is like, and I think what really held me or used to really hold me back with writing, actually going back to your point about your students and this question of inspiration,
Mm.
like what used to really hold me back was this feeling of I need something worth writing about. I need the time to do it. And actually, what I've the what I've changed in my practice is to flip that completely and be like, no, just keep writing just keep writing rubbish. Like, just keep putting out like every day, write this diary every day, keep writing words. And what that does is it's almost like it keeps the pen light, it keeps it feeling that you can pick this thing up anytime. You can write
Yeah.
because you've been writing a lot of crap. But within that crap, there's like 1% of stuff that is
Yeah.
worth going back to and worth looking at and sifting through and going, actually, there's something in that. And sometimes that turns into a poem, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I can't quite find the way into it. Sometimes it takes years,
Mm.
literally, to find the thing that unlocks that 1% of all the stuff. But I don't think it's wasted because I think otherwise I wouldn't have found that 1%. I wouldn't
Yeah.
have found the stuff that then I can use.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a big lesson as a writer
Mm.
to know that a lot of what you will write is not what
It's
ends up on
rubbish.
the page, but that you need to do that. And I think a lot of people have
Absolutely.
paralysis of like, particularly in something like a workshop, if maybe there's an element of
Mm.
sharing. And some people are wonderful in workshops, and I think that's fantastic, but it's also really infuriating if somebody writes a brilliant poem in the first 20 minutes and you're sitting there going,
Yeah.
so much waffle. But everybody's process is a bit different. And to
Yeah, for sure.
know,
I mean, like, go on. Sorry, I
no, just
interrupted.
to know that the waffle is part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. I mean, I've chatted to friends of mine who who may be starting out in writing,
Mm.
and one of them put it to me on about writing poetry. They were like, "I'm just amazed that I hadn't thought about the fact that you have to redraft anything.
Yeah.
I just thought poems kind of dropped out of the air and then they were there, and it's like." What made you think that? Like, novels don't turn up in that way. Music doesn't turn up in that way. Like, music certainly doesn't. People don't just suddenly have or very, very rarely, Paul McCartney will have a dream that turns into yesterday, right? But most of the time, bands will jam, they'll try stuff out, they'll record hours and hours and hours of rubbish.
Yeah.
And then one riff will go, oh, that's actually quite good.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, there's like going back to the the book specifically,
Mm.
there's maybe there's Rubos, there's another poem in there called Deadheading
Mm.
that came to me like in the shower and is like 99% exactly
Yeah.
as it came to me.
Yes.
Every other one, there's
Yeah.
44 in that book. Every other one was like, no, this is the result of quite a lot of editing, refining, cutting. Um, it's almost like, and it's actually quite different to the project I'm working on at the minute, but with Biceps, it's very much like um, a it's like carving out a marble. It's like there's a big lump of stuff,
Yeah.
lots of writing, and particularly at the beginning of the process of writing the book, I didn't know what it was. I was like, "Is this a
Yeah.
poetry book? Play?" Because it's a narrative collection.
Yeah.
Um, it's not like a greatest hits book or anything like that. It's sort of put together with a beginning, middle, and an end, and so it's um, going through this. It's like having a big chunk of marble and carving away at it, carving away, smoothing, polishing, until eventually you end up with these actually pretty short poems that are quite cut down.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of, I think, a lot of people don't think that that is necessarily the case of putting together a collection, because
Mm,
you read a collection and that's it. You just see that finished product. You
yeah.
don't see the lots and lots of drafts and all the rubbish that got cut.
I think we still have this idea of a poet as somebody for whom divine inspiration just kind of comes
Yeah.
down. And I think my theory, and I may well be wrong, but my theory is a lot of this comes from the kind of romantic era literature
Mm.
of like the idea of this kind of wonderful poet, sort of prophet poet. Uh,
Yeah.
and I find that so hilarious in a lot of poems because I study a lot of the romantic era. That's kind of my jam. And seeing them doing redrafts of these poems about poets having dreams and
Mm.
sprouting forth this beautiful
Yeah.
thing up, and I'm like, hypocrites! You're putting forth
Yeah, exactly. And then you get a poem like Shelley's Exhortation, and you're just like, why did that come out? Like that's a terrible poem. Sorry, personally, Shelley, but it's a bad one. I don't know what was happening that day, but like, um, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's this myth, I think, around poetry that is this divine thing, and maybe for some writers that is the case, but I really don't think it is for, like, it's certainly not for me, and I don't think it
Mm,
is for a lot of people.
no.
Like, I'm not I don't see myself as a especially great poet. Like, I don't think that's the case, but what I do is work hard
Yeah.
at the ideas and the editing, and not just for myself, but editing other writers and things like that, which
Mm,
helps to hone that craft. And yeah, I I wish poems fell out of the sky fully formed more than they actually do, but it's like it's really rare for me that that's the case.
yeah.
Um,
I think my favorite. I'm hoping this is Samuel Johnson. I think it's Samuel Johnson, but who said that anyone can be a writer if they work at it doggedly. And I
yeah,
think I'm way more. I'm that spirit of like it is a lot of work. Um,
yeah. I mean, I'm absolutely in that camp. And like when I was working on biceps more than now, um, I was totally just had a phase of getting really into, and you wouldn't tell it from the book, US hardcore punk. I was super into listening to bands that had like put out 7 inches with 10 songs on them.
yes.
Like, we're going to have in 5 minutes 10 songs, and it's just like, boom, there you go.
Yeah.
And there's just something about this, that kind of just like, yeah, just get the work done feeling of it, and just um, trying to express things in quite a clear, direct way
Yeah.
that really influenced that, more so than the stuff I'm working on now, actually. But like, yeah, this kind of, well, why should your poem be like 3 minutes long? Like, it's not a slam piece. It doesn't need to follow a cookie cutter. Like, if you can do it in a haiku, like, just
Yeah.
smash it out. They're done. Which does involve a lot of editing. It's not like
Yeah.
it's just suddenly it turns up that way.
So I'm intrigued by Biceps being a particularly since it is a narrative collection that it is very kind
Mm.
of I've got a story to tell as opposed to just kind of one here one there. Um,
Yeah.
how much were those poems individually formed and how much were they formed as part of a larger thing?
Yeah. So I mean, for the listeners benefit. Like, so Biceps, I kind of describe it as a love story, and it is, but it's about, it doesn't quite work in the way that you might think. In that the first section is, which is called Make, is all poems about being in a relationship and making a relationship work. Second part, much shorter, Break, is about that didn't work. And then Build, the third part, is all poems about kind of what we take from that when relationships break down and we start again, and how we rebuild ourselves out the other end. So that's kind of the arc of it. And so when I was putting together the collection, I wrote most of it in 2018,
Yeah.
which is now 6 years ago. My God! But yeah, that was. And you might get from the content of the book, I had a big breakup, and with a person I've been with for a long time, and then so a lot of it was trying to process that, and writing a lot about that, and like I say, that wasn't necessarily I'm writing a poem
Mm.
about it. Oh, I'm going to write another poem. It's just I've written a lot of stuff. I don't quite know what it is. Is it a poetry book? Is it a play? Is it like turning into a novel? Like, what is this?
Mm.
Um, and then um, and then I had a pub lunch with my friend Laurie Bolger, who is a
Mm.
phenomenal poet. If you
Yeah.
don't know them, and you should check out their work. And she was like, "No, Laurie, I think you need to just sit down and make this a poetry book now.
Yeah.
Stop mucking about." So
Need that for
I, yeah, so that's when it started to take shape, as a book of poetry, which I didn't know it was going to be poetry at the time, even, which sounds weird because I've been doing poetry for about 15 years now. But like, I was genuinely, I don't know what this is because I hadn't written a book before.
Yeah.
It's my first one. Um, and so, yes, it was mostly stuff I'd written within that period that evolved into this series of poems. Printed them all out, or printed out all these bits of text, and started to see where the connections were. Started to see they were falling into those three buckets, the make, break, and build kind of buckets, as it were. And then that kind of lent itself to being a structure for the book. And then from there, it was like, okay, well, it makes sense to tell this story in a roughly chronological way. And so it started to take shape as a narrative poetry collection, which was not necessarily in fact, it definitely wasn't like I set out to be like, I'm
Yeah.
going to write a narrative poetry collection with a beginning, middle, and end. And then there's one or two pieces that are a bit older. The like the first poem in the collection is one that's a few years older than 2018. But even then, like, that's from, like, I started writing in 2009, performing poetry in 2009.
Mm.
So, like, literally nothing from the first like 5 or 6 years of
Yes.
writing and performing got in the book at all. And when I started out, I was very much a rhyming kind of poet,
Mhm.
like rhythmic rhyming, kind of almost rappy,
Yeah.
very John Cooper Clarke influenced poet. When I got a little bit further on, things changed, and I wanted to try different stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it wasn't quite what people were expecting from me at the time, when it came out.
Yeah.
But that was what made it exciting, like being like, these poems that you've seen me perform that you really really love. Actually, this is not a collection of those put in
Yes.
one book. This is a one piece of work that I hope holds together cohesively. Um,
I think that's a really
and
important
that's
thing as well. Like you have to kind of trust the like that what you put forward is the right thing. And I think so often works that I really like, whether they're poetry books or novels or plays or whatever, there's a sense that the author maybe had something else in mind or didn't have in mind what it ended up being. And
yeah,
then it's having that conviction to go, this wants to be this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been listening. I listened to an episode of The Verb the other day, which I don't
Yeah.
know if people who are listening know. Show on Radio 3 with Ian McMillan presenting. It's a great source for just learning about the craft. And um, Caroline Bird, who is just one of my absolute favorite poets, was guesting on it,
Mm.
and she was just saying the worst thing to do in her view is to start a poem knowing where it's going to end.
Mm.
She's like, I always try and resist if I think I know where it's going.
Yeah.
Delivering on that, I try and just see where it's going to take me.
Mm.
I actually I don't disagree with her on that, but it's quite different to how I
Yeah.
certainly used to write,
Yeah. Yeah.
and learning to trust that is something that's not come naturally to me. Like I'm actually like way more than other people I think who write necessarily. Or maybe it's hard to know because I don't know everybody's process,
Mm.
but I'm quite often start writing with I get the last line
Yeah.
or I get something in the middle. I
Mm.
quite rarely am like, that's the first line, here we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Like the first poem in the book, actually part of the reason it's the first poem in the book is because it's literally like the only poem I've ever written where it's like, I've got a good first line, guys. Let's go. Like almost always, it's I've got the end or I've got something in the middle,
Mhm.
and then I have to kind of work backwards from there, which is
Yeah.
weird. Or certainly that's how it used to be more. Nowadays, since Biceps came out, I sort of not fell into a bit of it's probably fair to say I fell into a bit of a rut with writing and
Yeah.
not knowing
Yeah.
quite how I want to write because you have this weird sense of now I've delivered something,
Mm.
and you immediately see all the flaws in it.
Yeah.
You immediately see all the things you would have done differently. Um, you don't want to repeat exactly what you've just done. You also want to, if you're me, as with the first book, take a risk and try and do something different.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to necessarily work out what that change is going to be.
Mhm.
For me, it's weirdly ended up very, very weirdly ended up being uh, the project that I've been doing for the last year or so, which is uh, oh god, it's so stupid. It's a collection of sonnets based on the video game Metal Gear Solid from 1998. It's called Metal Gear Sonnets, obviously.
Wow.
Um, Wonderful title, right?
Mm.
And yeah, somehow I've realized what I actually needed was to go in a really different direction to
Yeah.
Biceps, not personal at all in terms of the content,
Mm.
not not like Biceps where it's I've written a shitload of stuff and I just need to edit it.
Yeah.
Much more if we take carving from marble as the Biceps,
Yeah.
this process was like I'm sitting down. I want to write about something that already exists.
Yeah.
That's my inspiration. It's basically fan fiction. It's basically a big sandbox for me to play around with and learn how to write sonnets,
Yeah.
which is great. Um, and so instead of it being carving out of marble, it's sitting down, knowing the form,
Mhm.
and producing something from nothing. Just using the form as the framework to kind of pull you through, and that has been a really different process. It's more like painting than carving. It's like you've got
Yeah.
nothing. Here's a blank canvas. Off you go.
Yeah.
You know what a sonnet basically has. So start writing. And that's been a really I don't know whether that's a project that's going to get published or not, but
Mm.
as a way of me enjoying writing again,
Yeah.
that has really worked and paid off dividends because I mean literally I started doing it because I was like I want to write a poem for my wedding. I want to write a sonnet because that's the romantic type of poem. But I'm not very good at writing sonnets, so I just need to practice.
Yeah.
So just having a playpen of like, I'm gonna just write about a video game for 44 poems. Here we go.
Yeah.
Like is a nonsense but fun way of just falling back in love with poetry again. So
Yeah.
that's been a really fun process to be involved in.
I mean, I love form. I'm a huge sort of form person, and I do sometimes go freeform, but I really like to have a structure to play around in. And I find it so kind of useful, particularly with some kind of inspiration thing, that there's sometimes I don't know what my next step is when I'm writing. I've got something, and actually the form kind of sometimes gives me the next step of, oh, you need to find something that rhymes here.
Yeah.
You need to find this many beats in your line.
Mm.
I find that very kind of comforting as a poet. I find it feels like a guide.
Yeah, it also pushes you to just make decisions you wouldn't have made otherwise,
Yeah.
creatively. Excuse me, I didn't mean to burp on mic. You can cut that bit. Um, it forces you to make decisions you wouldn't otherwise make, and that's really exciting. And I think I used to be quite uh, and I think a lot of poets are quite scared of form.
Mm,
And I think a lot of that comes down to just not having looked at enough examples of it that work well and
mm,
learning what works and what doesn't. Like, I think for me, like with with sonnets is mostly what I've been working with for the last like year, couple of years now. And what I have what I've realized is the reason I always used to dislike form is because I would write really strictly to the rules,
mm.
really like following it, not having read enough good examples of people who are great at sonnets, like Jacqueline Safra, Hannah Lowe, people like that, and um, not learning how to do it well. Like, I think what I would hate about when I used to write sonnets. And you often hear at open mics and performances somebody doing a sonnet about how they can't write a sonnet. And it's always so like ba bum 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 ba bum
Yeah.
B rhyme. Ba bum ba bum ba bum ba bum ba bum A rhyme. Ba bum ba bum ba bum ba bum ba bum B rhyme. And it's and you're like, actually, the reason this isn't working is because you're not allowing enjambment, you're not allowing the softness, you're not allowing half rhymes, sight rhymes,
Yeah.
um, kind of semi rhymes to carry this. You're focusing like I tend not to focus too much on the meter and the
Mm,
rhythm when it comes to writing in form, as much as other people maybe do. Because I find the examples of sonnets that I love kind of try it and not super strict. They're a bit more free flowing, a bit more open to just. Actually, I think the poem is taking it in this direction. So yeah, it's I think allowing yourself the freedom to just be like, I'll take what I want from this form, but I'll leave the little bits that aren't maybe working, or maybe make it feel really forced and um, and heavy. Um, and your last podcast was all about reading as a writer, and uh, last at time that we're recording this.
yeah.
But the the thing that you touched, or one of the things that you touched on in that is absolutely right, is with um, with writers, you can always tell if they're reading other writers or not,
Yeah.
and if they're taking inspiration or not. And my wife's a teacher. She tells me exactly the same when it comes to kids creative writing. Is you like you can teach and teach and teach, but the ones who are good at it are the ones who are just reading books all the time. They're the ones who are taking what they're reading and having this. It's not innate because it's learned, but like this feeling of how to balance a line, or how to balance a sentence, how to make a poem or prose, whatever it is, not feel forced and turgid and boring and all these other things.
So, a couple of things I would love to ask you, particularly about biceps. One
Mm,
thing, this is something I'm really interested in, particularly as it's kind of your first full collection, is that right? Um,
yeah, correct.
did you have any poems that you absolutely loved but didn't quite fit the narrative? And did you shoehorn them
Yeah,
in?
definitely. Did I shoehorn them in? No, the answer is I didn't shoehorn them in.
Strange.
Yes, I did have poems I um, loved might be a strong word, actually, for them. It's more actually, I'll put it in this way.
Mhm.
So when I started working on the book,
Mm.
one of the things I did, which my friend Laurie, not me, not my invisible friend Laurie Bolger, um, said to me was go through your writing, um, like everything you've done. Go
Mm.
through, like make a list
Mm.
of all the stuff you've written, all the poems, um, and I did, and and that includes like poems that are. You remember earlier I was saying I've got an idea for a poem that
Mm.
counts. Like I
Mm.
think I want to write about this. That counts. So I was like, okay, I've got about 170, um, and that's obviously way too many.
Yeah.
Um, and so she was like, okay, cut it down, get 40. So I
Yeah.
did, got 40. Um, and like as part of that, just cutting down, there was like, this is too performancy. This
Mm.
doesn't quite work. I'm not sure this will work on the page. Um, and then there were about three poems that I was like, yes, these ones will definitely be in it. They're among
Mm.
my best work.
Yeah.
And then what happens is you, because I was like, those are my best work,
Mm.
um, you spend all your editing time and all your work time refining the other poems, the
Yes.
newer ones, the stuff that you're excited to work on because it's
Yes.
newer and you think, oh, I can really make something exciting and good out of this. Don't have to worry about those three. Those three are like they're solid, they're fine. And then you come to the end of the process, or not the end, nowhere near the end actually, but you come to a point in the process where you look at it all, you read through the manuscript, and you go, those three that were my favorite and best at the start are now way worse than every other poem because I've spent less time editing them, less time working on them. They feel like they're a time capsule from years ago
Yeah.
because they are,
Yeah.
and they don't, and they just didn't fit. They were all. I was going to have this little run of literally these three poems
Mm.
together, in the third part of the book, and they all sort of focused on family.
Mhm.
Um, and the more that I got to reading it and rereading it and reading it with others,
Mm.
like the feedback that they gave me and that I knew deep down was that doesn't that this little run, it doesn't work. It
Yeah.
doesn't add anything. It doesn't fit. There may be okay poems, but they just don't fit this project,
Yeah.
and you're going to need
Yeah.
to take them out because it will make for a stronger book, which I did. Um, and then similarly to that is that, and I did make that cut, and that was the right thing to do.
Mm.
Similarly to that, though, is when I submitted it to Burning Eye, the publisher,
Yes.
um, I'd worked on it a lot. I'd redrafted it a lot. I felt like this is as good as it can be right now. Here we
Yeah.
go. I'm going to send it.
Yeah.
But I also had this nagging feeling in my mind of there are some extra beats to this story that are not in there
Yeah.
that need to be in there because
Yeah.
it's a narrative collection.
Yeah.
And so, much like I said earlier with these, I want to write a poem about this thing.
Yeah.
I had those
Mhm.
still hanging about. Um, and there's a poem in there called Check, which is a prose poem, and like is a bit more, was hard to write, both in the sense of I couldn't quite work out the way into it, and hard to write in the sense of I'm writing about something in that particular poem that I'm not very proud of, that is like I
Yeah.
feel bad about
Yeah.
that I did in my past, and so but I knew the collection as a whole isn't complete without that. It
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
quite go to where I need it to go to. It's
Yeah.
missing a beat. It's not taking enough of the time to address this part of the story. And so in the between the collection being accepted and it being published,
Mhm.
it was okay. I have some time, I can fill out those extra bits that I need to
Yeah.
give it that extra flavor, give it that extra kind of tissue, so that by the time it's done, it's like, okay, this holds together and hangs together as a whole
Mhm.
narrative book
Yeah.
better um, than before.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's not just cutting necessarily; it's also knowing I need to add something here.
There's a little gap where there's a
Sometimes,
little something missing.
yeah,
What
exactly,
was that
exactly.
process like for finding your publisher, choosing your publisher?
Hmm.
Did you have them in mind for quite a long time, or was it?
Okay, well, let's do this one. This is from the collection. Um, I haven't read it for a while, so apologies if I'm rusty. Um, this is, and I'm picking it because you said it's what's got an interesting kind of publishing story. So this is a poem from the collection. It's called Hull. In the book, I was originally titling it To Hull and Back, and there when I so this is a prime example of that thing of I I went to Hull.
Mhm.
I quite enjoyed my trip to Hull with my partner at the time, and I wanted to uh, write about it because I'm from the south coast, and there was this really just strange feeling I had when I was there of just this feeling very at home in
Mhm.
Hull,
Yeah.
even though I'd never been there before. This feeling of you're by the sea, but you're in this town that's quite. Um, I say this with love, like kind of grotty, and kind of wonderful, and got this brilliant history to it, but is also very industrial and grimy and a bit strange in this way of being beautiful, but also a bit downtrodden at the same time.
Mhm.
And it reminded me a lot of some of the towns on the south coast that I would kind of grew up in and knew well. Um, and so literally got back from it and wrote like this poem, and it was literally about 5 A4 pages long. It was
Oh.
so long about like just everything that happened when I was in Hull and
Mhm.
all the funny things I saw. Like they had a Hall of Fame for in Hull, and bands like Sade were there, and I was like, well, actually, Sade isn't from Hull, but you've kind of claimed her, the singer, because some of the band were from Hull, and like me just chatting about the Hull Hall of Fame and stuff like that, and all this, all these things that I found there, very like travelogue writing, and then it was clearly way too long to be in the book. Cut it down massively, massively, massively. Cut it down again. Cut the ending, I think, and it ended up being what's in the book, and it ended up as well because it was in the collection, which is about this relationship and this breakup and kind of refinding yourself. It's in the first part of that, when things are starting to go a bit off the rails and a bit wrong, and that flavor of the book overall shaped the poem. It wasn't really about that,
Yeah.
but it started to become more about this feeling of like, not things aren't quite right
Yeah.
here in this relationship, which is not what I was expecting it to be about. I thought it was going to be a
Yeah.
silly poem about Hull. It certainly was in the first draft, and then
Yeah.
by the time it's got to this, it's like the collections informed the poem as well. So,
Right.
um, so yeah, that's you asked about the publishing
Yeah.
history, so that's
Absolutely.
me, my ramble on it. So I'll do this one. It's called Hull. Hull, the Portsmouth of the North. I sing Highway to Hull all the way, you don't. We're greeted by a street of 99, 98, and 97p shops. I make a cutthroat sign on my neck. You look the other way. We get lunch in the real sandwich company. Sick of those fake sandwich companies, I wink. Your crust is soggy. By the Humber, tobacco warehouses erode into the types of pie shops where each pie has a Christian name. As wind whips off the river, I tie the belt of my coat through your elbow's crook. Don't want you to blow away. There's a beautiful south poster at the ferry port. Blue is the colour. The salt in my lungs brings back the sandcastle towns where I grew up, always on the edge of being washed away. I feel at home. Try to explain this to you, but my words are whisked into the wind.
That
That's
is
it.
beautiful. That is such
Thank
a
you.
lovely poem.
Cheers. It wasn't when it was just a big block of nothing.
But it's interesting that you said this started out as like this sort of jolly poem about Hull, but
Yeah,
there's such sadness in that poem. Like there is this real kind of something
there is.
really vibrant, but then all at the same time there's this little kind of ache running through it. That I think that's
Yeah, which I wasn't which I wasn't expecting it to suddenly have. Also, publishing wise, like this is one of the ones, and I do this quite a bit in the book, and other poets do this, which is where the title of the poem is the first. If I'm performing it, that's the first line.
yes,
The title is Hull, and when I perform it, Hull is my
yeah,
first word. But you don't have the title and then the word Hull.
yeah.
So yeah, it's you got to be efficient, and if the title is the first line, just cut your first line.
Yeah, this is very true. This is very true. Laurie, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed having a chat, but enjoyed your wisdom, and I think it will be very helpful to a lot of writers
You're
to
very welcome.
hear your process here.